Right, so this is my base in Palworld, and today we are going to be having a look at the RTX 3060 Ti in Palworld. Obviously, today we're pairing that GPU with a 12400F CPU from Intel Core i5, and then that again is paired with 3600 megatransfers per second CL18 memory. Right, so we'll be testing at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K at a bunch of presets. Currently, we're on the Epic preset, and I'm actually quite surprised that this game runs very well here at the Epic preset at 1080p. And I did not expect it to be running at above 80 frames per second. The game does have a few stutters. That's just Unreal Engine 5, right? So you've got a couple of shader compilation stutters and also some traversal stutters at times. There's nothing really you can do about it. It does the same on my moderately high-end system as well. But once you run around a little bit, it does get slightly better. So as you can see, there was a pretty big stutter there. It does become slightly better with more the CPU power, but inevitably they're still there. But as you can see, getting a pretty decent experience here at on the Epic preset, except for those stutters. Okay, all right, so let's just see if you want a little bit of a higher frame rate, what you can actually do. Let's just avoid being attacked here. So as you can see, we're on the Epic preset here, 1080p, and then if we just drop this down to the high preset, I don't have any upscaling enabled here as well. One thing that I don't understand about this game is it's very popular, but it still does not have FSR. It only has DLSS. So we gained a little bit. We're getting around 90 to 100 frames per second here at times. It'll depend on area, obviously, whether there's a lot of pals. As you can see, it drops into the 80s here, and then it goes back to the 90s. And this is pretty much what you can expect throughout the whole game. Some areas are definitely a little bit more demanding than others. I'm just testing close to my base. Anyway, so getting a pretty decent experience here. I mentioned it earlier. Even on the high preset, I do think that even the Epic preset is good enough here. Right, so getting an average of 92 frames per second on the high preset. As I said, Ultra preset or Epic preset is plenty playable. You can lock it to 60 frames per second if that's what you desire, and you'll get a 60 frames per second experience at all times, except for those pretty big stutters. All right, so I think that's going to conclude our 1080p testing. Let's move on to 1440p. Right, we're back at my base now, and we're at 1440p once again on the Epic preset, and we did not even lose that much performance. We're still above 60 frames per second. The frame time graph is a little bit more inconsistent now. I had to restart the game because you have to change resolutions within Windows to actually change resolutions in game. Now we dropped below 60 there for a few seconds. So it's definitely more demanding to run, obviously, because the resolution is quite a bit higher. Don't mind the GPU temperature. We are running at 77 or 78 degrees Celsius here. It usually peaks around there. This is a very entry-level Gainward Ghost GPU, so the cooling is not the best, but it works. It doesn't really thermal throttle anyway. I've done extensive testing on it, and it's doing pretty well, yeah. So almost a locked 60 frames per second experience. We're getting an average here of 62, and our 1% lows are sitting at 51, but our 0.1% lows are struggling quite a bit. We're sitting there at 17. Right, as I said, this is just the game. Played for a bit, played for a half an hour or so, and a lot of these stutters do disappear until you enter a new area. Right, so let's just drop this down to the high preset. Right, we're now on the high preset, and we gained a few frames per second, not that much, but maybe enough for us to not drop below 60 frames per second in this area at least. It's probably not the most demanding area, but it's also not the lightest area. There are some other areas that might be slightly more demanding, but overall this is kind of what you can expect with this GPU, right? It's definitely it'll give you a good indication of what the performance is like. I just keep on shooting these guys because my son, he's 2 years old, he loves the sound these guys make. He doesn't understand that we kill them. He just loves the sound they make when they die. Anyway, so at these settings, definitely still a pretty good experience, right? Above 60 frames per second, and our VRAM usage is sitting at 4 gigabytes, so no real issue there for the 8 gigabyte 3060 Ti, and even at 4K the VRAM usage is quite okay in this game. All right, so let's just I'm going to drop this down to medium, and then we'll start with some DLSS. Right, we're now on the medium preset and we gained another 10, 15 frames per second, maybe even 20 frames per second at times, getting around 80 frames per second here. This is probably where I'd be playing this, maybe with on the high preset with DLSS. But if you want to play at 1440p native, then the medium preset seems to be giving you a pretty good experience here, right? Let's see what we can find in here. Nothing much. Right, so I'm going to go back to my base. Okay, they're quite aggressive. I'm going to go back to my base and then we'll play around with some DLSS settings here. But as you can see, the frame rate average here was 85 and our 1% laser sitting at 69. Right, so going back to my base and then we'll play around with some DLSS settings. Right, we're on the high preset here with DLSS set to quality. I'm not going to be testing the epic preset here with DLSS quality just to keep the video bit shorter. The high preset is definitely still very good looking, and the performance is pretty decent as well, not dropping below 60 frames per second here, and our GPU usage is still hovering, well, at around 100%. It drops down to 94 at times, but that's just during stutters. That 1200F CPU is definitely capable of driving this GPU, except at 1080p with DLSS set to quality. I tested that. We're running into some CPU bottlenecks there, and that's why I didn't test the DLSS at 1080p. Just this combination makes it a little bit of a CPU bottleneck, and that's not what we're here for. We're here to test GPUs. Right, so I mean, I'm not a big fan of DLSS at 1080p anyway, or any upscaling. So that's another reason why I didn't test it, and the performance was pretty good as well at 1080p. Wasn't really needed. So getting a pretty good experience here as well, 80 frames per second give or take, and it seems that our stuttering has reduced a little bit. I can't remember off the top of my head what the 0.1% loads were at 1440p high, but there you have it. Right, so let's drop this down to DLSS balance. The DLSS balance is still perfectly usable at 1440p, and then we'll drop the preset down to medium. Right, so DLSS set to balanced on the high preset, and we didn't gain that much. Still the stuttering persists. Like it does. You do get used to it. It's definitely not acceptable, but you do get used to it. Like it's not the end of the world. As I said, you play a little bit and they start to disappear anyway. So, but you can see at times we didn't gain much by going down to DLSS balanced here. Overall, our highs would be higher, but I see our 0.1% less are still sitting at 19. So, as you can see, the graphical settings don't really have that big an impact on the stuttering, as I mean, it makes perfect sense. All right, so getting an average of 92 frames per second, our 1% laser sitting at 72, and our 0.1% laser sitting at 19. As you can see, the frame rate does vary quite a bit depending on what's happening on the screen where you're looking at. We're getting 100 frames per second there. Looking that way, it drops into the 80s. So the performance varies quite wildly. Nothing unexpected though, but just giving you an idea. All right, so let's drop this down to the medium preset, and then we'll start playing with the DLSS at the medium preset as well. All right, on the medium preset, but DLSS set to quality here. This is actually not terrible. The game still looks plenty good. The resolution is quite crisp because we are at DLSS quality, not balanced, and we're getting 100 frames per second. So the only reason why I'm testing with a bunch of DLSS settings here is if you want a higher frame rates because you've got a high refresh rate monitor, then I mean you'd obviously be interested in higher frame rates, and that's what I'm testing here. As you can see, we gained quite a little bit just by dropping down to the medium preset with DLSS set to quality. It's a better experience and a higher frame rate than on the high preset with DLSS set to balance. So maybe something to consider. And the game still looks plenty good. Like the texture detail, everything is not horrible. I mean, the game's graphics do get some criticism online. I do think it's mainly because of the art style. I do think that this game does look quite good. Like, not the best Unreal Engine 5 looking game out there, but it's definitely not terrible. So if you can get used to the art style, then I mean, you'll have a good time. It's visually not too bad either. All right, so getting an average of 106 frames per second, our 1% laser sitting at 82, and our 0.1% laser sitting at 9. Okay, so stuttering, once again, not reduced by going to the medium preset with DLSS set to quality. I think that's where I'm going to leave it. I just want to see what the performance Gains are by going to DLSS balance. I'm going to stand here. So we're getting 100 frames per second. I'm just going to enable DLSS balance to see what kind of performance gains we get. Okay, so we're at DLSS balanced here and we gained 9%, 8%. Okay, so I mean, it's easy to go from to calculate the difference from 100 to 109. That's 9%. So I mean, if you want to gain 10% performance, then use DLSS set to balanced. All right, I think it's time for us to move to 4K. Okay, so I restarted the game and we're at 4K on the high preset, and as you can see, we took a big hit in the performance there. We are getting around 40 frames per second. That's not unexpected either. I mean, we're definitely not running out of VRAM here, which is pretty good to see. Some Unreal Engine 5 games definitely handle VRAM usage quite well. I've seen that in the past, but this is definitely not a very good experience actually. So I'm not going to be testing too much on the high preset. So let's drop this down to the medium preset and see if we can get close to 60 frames per second. Okay, so we're on the medium preset and we gained 10%, give or take, and this is still not a good experience unless you're aiming for 30 frames per second. Lock it to 30 and you'll have a good time if that's what your thing. But unfortunately, if you're aiming for 60, we're quite a ways off from there. So I'm not going to be testing too much at 4K native. This is definitely not a 4K GPU. I'm just showing this for the people out there that actually do have 4K monitors and just want to game. Right, so let's go ahead and enable some DLSS here. I'm going to leave it on the medium preset. I think that's a fairly good preset to target if you want to run 4K on this GPU. All right, I think we've done it. I mean, it's not going to maintain 60 frames per second at all times, but all I did was enable DLSS quality. We got a pretty decent bump in the frame rate. We went from 45 to 60, so the very good increase there. Maybe not in the amount of total frames, but the percentage is quite big. And now you can see we are hovering around 60 frames per second. Definitely not what I was expecting. I was expecting us to maybe run at DLSS balanced at least, or maybe even performance to get 60 frames per second. I know there's not a lot happening on the screen here. This is just my normal benchmark run. Like, I know it's kind of boring to watch sometimes, but it's just a set run and it's easy to replicate for all my other videos as well. So that's the reason why I do that. All right, so getting a pretty decent experience, I think. Not always 60, but not a lot 60, I mean, and definitely not terrible either. If I had to pair this GPU with a 4K monitor, then I'd consider this. Maybe drop it down to balanced, which we'll go ahead and do right now. Okay, so we're on balanced, and this time we didn't gain that much. As we saw earlier, it's around 9 to 10%, and I don't think we gained 10% here. We're still, this chicken is very angry. We're still hovering below 70. What? We saw 70 there. Okay, so I'll take that back. We're not hovering below 70. But as you can see, this will give you a little bit of a more consistent 60 frames per second experience. Not saying it won't drop below 60. I'm not going to be testing the low preset. The game does start to look less good at low presets, so I'm just using the medium preset. Yeah, I think this is perfectly fine, but as you can see, there's still quite a bit of stuttering, right? The 0.1% laser sitting at 10, and that's just the name of the game. Right, I don't think I've got much to add here. That's going to conclude our 3060 Ti video in Palworld. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and as always, we hope to see you in the next one.